While I was doing my doctoral studies, I went all over the country to present data. They said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm just determined I'm going to go back to the Mount and develop programs for women to get their degrees in pre-med and biomedical research." I said, "I'm the only student in all my classes that's a woman. I'm one of two." We need women in medicine. We need women in biomedical research. We think differently. It's not that it's better, it's just different. We look at things a little differently. We might ask different questions that spur us to do different things. And I would say to the professors, "Where are the women? Am I the only woman?" Yeah, and they kind of shrug and say, "Yeah."
When they asked us what did we want to have as a major, 3 of us chose math. One ended up in math, one ended up in music, and I ended up in biology. How they decided that, I have no idea, but I am forever grateful, because my first class with Mary Gerald, I just fell in love with microbiology. She was unique. She marched to her own drummer. She taught more in lab than she did in lecture. She taught through allowing us to have experiences rather than just book knowledge. Experiencing the creativity of these little creatures, things that they invented, and we think we're so smart. To see the amazing things that these one-cell creatures had invented over the years, discovering a whole new world.
I never separated being nun from doing science. I mean, to me, it was just part of the universe, part of God's world.
I did live through a time when I had a very difficult time getting the 2 worlds together. When I began teaching at the Mount in the 50s, I had been invited to give a talk on spirituality. And I remember lying on my bed in the dorms up at Chelan thinking, what can I talk about? Because I still felt like I was living in 2 worlds, with 1 foot here and 1 foot here. And it was like an inspiration came to me, well, pray with what you know. So I thought about, I would be a carbon atom, and I would pray like a carbon atom. And I would pray about who can I bond with as a carbon atom, other carbons, and who could I bond with as oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. And so that's what I shared. I said, I just discovered this new spirituality that I'm using, and it's working for me. Well, people came up afterwards and said, "Thank you so much. We have exactly the same problem. We feel like we're living in 2 different worlds."
When I was first starting my research and when I was in training, I used rats, mice, lizards, and I'd get some of these guys, "You're a nun, how can you cut that head off that lizard?" And then I would just smile sweetly and say, not so sweetly, I would smile and say, "Well, the option I have, or the alternative I have, is that you give me your brain tissue and your heart tissue, and if you're game to do that, then I don't have to kill that lizard or that rat." It would shut them up, as it were. They say, "Okay, you got a point," you know, and start a conversation usually, or just take off.
A very strange thing happened. One day, the provincial called me in and said, what are you majoring in? And I said, bacterial genetics. And she said, oh, you can't do that. And I said, well, that's what you sent me to study, microbiology. She said, well, we just got a letter from the cardinal saying that no religious could study genetics in a secular university. So could you call it something else? I said, no, I can't call it something else. And so she said, well, maybe you'll have to go somewhere else. I had always wanted to go to Berkeley. So I just listened while she was saying, you know, there's all this hanky-panky going on at Catholic U and Notre Dame, you know, sisters and brothers getting together, and I'm really worried about our sisters going there. So I thought, oh, here's my chance. I said, well, you know, I could go to Berkeley because it would be much cheaper and it would be a good education and you wouldn't have to worry. So she said, oh. So I took that as a yes. So I applied to Berkeley and got accepted. And about 2 months later, I get another call. She says, you know, I'm worried about you losing your faith at Berkeley. So I said, well, you know, I've already applied, and I need one physics class. So could I just do that for the summer? Okay, yeah, so you can do that. So off I went for the summer, and I just never came back. And those were absolutely fabulous years. Those were the years of the Vatican II. Those were the years of the free speech movement. It was just an absolutely marvelous time to be at an international university.
When we were presenting at the national meetings and international meetings, I would get a few, my students, I warned my students, I prepared my students for questions. I said, don't let anyone talk you down. Just be gracious and say, well, what about? Or, well, if I did this, if I didn't do that, would we find a cure for it? I tried to train them into, you can be assertive, but not aggressive, and not nasty.
I really loved it. Again, I guess like Mary Gerald, I taught more in the lab. You know, I always wanted to do my own labs. I could have had a lab assistant, but I found that there was the personal contact was in the lab. So I valued that. No, I love my time at the Mount.
I loved every minute at the Mount, still do. Do I miss it? Oh yes. I miss it. In my heart, I miss it.